Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this comprehensive guide on how to counter every hero in the game. This guide is going to be a long one, but if you're struggling with a specific hero, I suggest using the timestamps down below, and then you can go back and forth in the video for the specific hero you feel like you need to get better at countering. So before going into this video, I want to go through the 4 item categories I'm going to be talking about mostly in this video. There's also, of course, like playstyle choices you can do that we will get through on the way. But these are the 4 categories that I consider when I talk about how to counter each hero. So first of all, you have anti-heal. So a lot of heroes in this game have a lot of different healing abilities and effects, and the ways of counter them are lowering the healing amount. So the strongest one is Spirit Burn, which is a 6.4k item that does 70% heal reduction, but you have to deal at least 500 damage within a certain amount of time for it to be active. Then you have Decay, which is an item that you can apply to a hero to apply a 40% healing reduction, and it lasts for 10 seconds. And then you have Heal Bane, which is just a passive healing reduction on any target that you do spirit damage to. And last but not least, Toxic Bullets, which is an item that you normally buy for carries that shoot their guns pretty fast, because you need to build up the debuff before it actually applies reduction. So that's category number 1. Category number 2 is movement and silencing effects. So these are mostly active items like Slowing Hex that stops people from using their abilities. It upgrades the Vortex Web later on that applies the same effect but in a area of effect. You also have items like Curse that completely disarms, interrupts the silence. It just disables your character. You have Disarming Hex that disarms enemies. You have Silence Wave, a bunch of items that basically apply some sort of debuff on the enemy to stop them from doing what you want them to not be doing. And then next up we have Resistance Shred. So Resistance Shred is essentially that some heroes, they either like to build a lot of tanky items, or they have abilities like Yamato's ultimate that gives you a ton of resistances, meaning Resistance Shred is gonna be a lot better. So one of the best ones is Crippling Headshots, for instance. Reduces both bullet resist, spirit resist, and actually has healing reduction too. Forgot to mention that earlier. There are a lot of other items too. Alchemical Fire reduces bullet resistance, as well as Hollow Point reduces bullet resist. There's also items like Bullet Resist Shredder. There's items like Mystic Vault. There's plenty of items that can apply resistance shreds of some sorts. If you're ever in doubt, by the way, you can also use the search function. You can type healing reduction and you can actually see all the items that have any sort of healing reduction. And this can be very useful to find different things. Or if you want an item to have more duration, then you can just type in duration. You'll find all the items that give you that. It's very handy when you're trying to make builds or when you're trying to just learn more about the game in general, because there's a lot of items in here. Anyway, the last category is defensive items. So defensive items are essentially just whenever you are taking damage or being annoyed by a specific ability, what kind of defensive items can you buy to counter those? And these are mostly greens, obviously. You have items like bullet resistance that obviously makes you take less damage to bullet, spirit resistance, but sometimes there's also items like spirit shielding, which is good if you are taking a lot of burst damage from spirit, for instance, like that. Or even return fire if you're taking a lot of damage from like a Haze ult or something and you want to return it back. And last but not least, 2 items that you should buy a lot more than you think is Debuff Remover and Counterspell. Debuff Remover lowers the duration of all debuffs on you, and it also has an active component where you can remove abilities like 7 stun, slowing hex, silences, all these kind of juicy things. And Counterspell can literally stop any ability in the game if you press parry at the right time. Is it a skill issue? Absolutely, but that's why we are here to learn. Okay, so that was the small introduction. Let's dive right into it, and we're going to start with Abrams from the top. So Abrams is a frontlining tanky character. He has 2 different abilities that heals him. So both Siphon Life heals him when he damages people around him, and his Infernal Resilience, which is a passive, regenerates 13% of the damage he's taken over time. So this hero is very reliant on healing. He also likes to buy items like Life Strike, Healing Booster. So this is just a hero that buying anti-heal is a very natural counter. Also, because he has a very high health pool, items like Toxic Bullets will be even better because it deals a percentage of max health in damage on top of that. So the first thing you want to do if you're struggling with just like killing an Abrams from being too tanky, then that's your go-to. But what if you're struggling with getting killed by an Abrams and not struggling with killing him. You may think that's the same, but it's actually not. So what I mean by this is that sometimes an Abrams can just stun you against the wall and instantly burst you down. So the most obvious one is obviously stay away. Like, he's got a shotgun, he's got a big fist, and he's got a big book. So stay far away, you're probably going to take less damage, sure. But there are also other ways. First of all, again, with the search, you can type in melee resistance, and you'll notice that some of these items actually make you take less damage from melee attacks. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, because if you die to an Abrams, it's usually because he stuns you and then kills you. You can also get items like reactive barrier. Reactive barrier basically gives you a shield whenever you get stunned or movement locked in general. I doubt an Abrams is ever going to kill you without movement locking you. So if you have a problem with getting pinned by Abrams, I highly recommend buying reactive barrier. You can buy it early in the laning stage, or even spirit shielding, because usually these two abilities are probably going to proc spirit shielding as well. Okay, next up we have Bebop. So Bebop is played usually in two ways. He's either played as a purely gun damage carry, which is the strongest build by far, or he's played more like a spirit type where the bombs do a lot of damage, which is a weaker build, but it's 10 times more fun. And guys, video games are meant to be fun unless you're trying to be a pro player. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how to counter each one, of course. First thing you need to think about with Bebop is that when he uppercuts you, you can actually dash sideways. So this is a pretty new change, but before, when you got uppercut, you were movement locked. You're not anymore, because you have to remember that when you are uppercut, it's very easy to just track your target through the air. So as soon as a Bebop uppercuts you, try to use a dash or a heavy melee or anything that offsets your movement, because if you look at this, how easy it is to track my target, he just follows a straight path like that. So that's the first thing to think about. Another thing I will say is that if someone plays gun bop, then definitely getting bullet armor or bullet resilience or return fire in general are great items to dodge a lot of that stuff. But in general, against Bebop, counterspell is always really good, because basically what happens is that if you get hooked, Bebop usually wants to spam his bomb and his exploding uppercut as soon as you're hooked next to him. So if you spam your counterspell, you're very likely to dodge both the bomb and the uppercut. And the cool thing about that is that if you parry the uppercut, you no longer give him extra spin up time and extra damage as well. So counterspell is definitely very good. If it's a specific bomb Bebop that does a lot of damage, there's two things you can do. First of all, there's more than two. Debuff remover is the most obvious one. It straight up just removes the bombs you have on you. Spellbreaker is also a good one because it will almost negate all the damage from one of the bombs at least. They usually build echo shards, so you have two. And in general, just having more spirit resilience, because if you play against the bomb Bebop, he's going to do 0 gun damage. So you can specifically target the damage type you're taking from the bombs. Of course, it sucks to get hooked in the first place, and a lot of people also buy Warpstone. So with Warpstone, you just, as soon as you get hooked, you basically just pop your Warpstone, and then you're no longer in that kind of curve that the uppercut causes, meaning that you can dodge a lot of damage. Plus, it also gives you 40% bullet resist right after for 6 seconds. Another one, if Bebop gets really strong and he starts self-bombing, then of course, debuff remover is no longer going to work. Counterspell still works, spellbreak still works, and the last resort, ethereal shift. You can pop it, and for 4 seconds, you're completely invulnerable any sorts of damage. So those are a few options you have. Bebop is also a very high health target, so percentage-based damaged, like I talk about toxic bullets and decay, always also usually a good buy against Bebop. All right, next up we have Billy. So with Billy, a lot of the counters that we talked about Abrams also applies, which also reminds me that I should have mentioned rebuttal earlier. With Abrams, rebuttal is also very good. Rebuttal basically means that when you parry someone, you do 30% bonus damage to them, and you heal yourself back for the damage parried. So yeah, rebuttal against melee characters is great. I will say though, I think rebuttal is better against Billy than Abrams, specifically because Abrams has a shoulder charge that guarantees him a heavy melee as long as he has his tier 2 upgrade. Whereas Billy wants to weave in a lot of light and heavy melees whenever he can, because when he pops his blasted, he keeps getting bonus health by meleeing, meaning that you're much more likely to get value out of rebuttal against a Billy, and you can buy it basically in the laning stage. Other than that, a lot of the same things applies when you're fighting against Abrams. Buying a lot of melee resistance can be very important. He basically wants to stay on top of you. So he has a lot of abilities that do that. Reactive barrier is great against him. Chain gang pulls you in as well. He's a melee bruiser, so are you in melee range of him, you're probably going to have a hard time, so want to avoid doing that. Another thing that's interesting is that melee damage is bullet damage, so you can also buy bullet resilience to tank some of that. But Billy is pretty reliant on playing with his blasted passive. So when you see how, look at what this character looks like. When I press 3,
this is how we get it done.
See how his character like lights up and you can hear that music and stuff? You can actually see that when you're the enemy too. So bear in mind that because this one has a 27-second cooldown, you can actually try to bait Billy into popping his blasted and then not fight him while this is active. That's going to make him a lot less tanky. So have that in mind, that when he has his blasted available, probably not the best idea to fight him. But yeah, other than that, it's the standard thing as with other close combat bruisers. Toxic bullets is good. All the anti-heals are good. But it kind of depends on what issue you have with them. Because sometimes if a hero is very, very strong in terms of damage, you need to buy different counter items compared to if you're struggling with killing them because they have bought a lot of greens. So this is where you have to think as well. Like, what am I struggling with here? Am I struggling to kill him, or am I struggling with surviving from him killing me? Another thing is that Chain Gang, his ultimates, it basically grabs all the targets nearby like this within the circle, and then it pulls them like this. But you can actually break that chain. And how do you break that chain? You line of sight. So whenever you see those hear those chain sounds, first of all, just stay as far away as possible. But if you notice that the chains have already attached to you, you have to try to run out of line of sight until that chain breaks. Very important. I will say a lot of the time I've fought against Billy's, I've noticed that he's going to go for heavy melee right as this chain pulls you in. And you're kind of like flying around, being pulled around anyway. So I feel like a good time to press parry would usually be right as this chain gang pulls you in. Okay, next up we have Calico. So Calico is one of those very annoying heroes to play against in a lot of cases. She has a lot of burst damage. She goes around in her cat form and she's really hard to notice because when you're cat form, she doesn't appear on the minimap. In general, it's a hero that is fairly strong in the laning stage. She can definitely do a lot of surprise damage. So the first thing I'm thinking about is like, she has a lot of burst, but not a lot of sustain. So if you need easy ways of surviving more burst, the first thing that comes to my mind is just Spirit Shielding. Spirit Shielding is great against Calico specifically because when she pops her Gloom Bombs and Leaping Slash and her ult, you're guaranteed that Spirit Shielding is going to proc every time. Another thing that's very interesting about this hero is that Slowing Hex works on 3 of her abilities. If she's slowing hexed, she cannot Leaping Slash, she cannot cat form, and she cannot ult. So slowing hex is a great item against Calico. And also, to be honest, silence wave as well. In a lot of cases, any hero that is like slippery, you know, like Calico and Pocket and so on, slowing hex is great, and obviously it's very cheap, so you can buy it early on. And usually, silence wave is good against those same types of heroes. Another thing to identify with Calico is whether or not she's playing Spirit or more like a melee bruiser. So make sure you look at the items of the Calico on the enemy team, because there's usually 2 builds. They either buy a lot of greens and a lot of melee items, or they just go full Spirit, and you have to itemize completely different against those 2 types of playstyles. So try to be smart about things, you know, like when you're checking the top bar, check if there's a lot of heroes with the orange bar or with the purple bar or with the green bar, and try to itemize accordingly. Next up is Doorman. Doorman has a lot of abilities that displace you and a lot of burst damage. So this is another hero where Spirit Shielding is definitely a great item to buy. His ult sends you into the Baroness, and it definitely helps to have more stamina because you have to get out of the Baroness as fast as possible. So if you have items like extra stamina, that definitely helps because you can easily get out of the hotel if you do a jump dash plus heavy melee. and then it just mantles you over the edge. That's one really easy way of getting out. But in general, he has a lot of crowd control, and most of the damage is spirits. Almost all of the damage is spirits. If he goes gun, well then obviously buy bullet resilience. But if he doesn't, then I would definitely recommend getting spirit shielding and some extra stamina. Another interesting thing is that you can use counterspell or E-shift to completely negate the damage of hotel guests. So for instance, if you wait until hotel guest almost is finished and then you press parry, you're just gonna parry all the damage from the hotel guest. And if you are lucky, you might just parry whatever hits you on the other side when you come out too. So yeah, counterspell, definitely great against Doorman in general. And of course, E-shift as well. If a Doorman is really strong, you might want to consider getting both. Okay, so next up we have Drifter. Drifter is a hero that excels in taking out isolated targets. So I guess like a lot of the things about countering Drifter is also about avoiding fighting him in a 1 versus 1 scenario, because that's where he's really strong. He actually gets a lot of bonus damage from just fighting against isolated targets, and if he kills you, it gets permanent weapon damage too. So this is one of those heroes where countering them is more about not being in an isolated spot in the first place and not fighting him in a 1v1. Even if you have the same soul count, I don't recommend fighting a 1v1 unless you are confident that you're just stronger than him or have a better build or something. Most builds do a lot of gun damage. Some people also try to do the spirit burst thing. When he ults, he reduces the vision of targets on the enemy team. And when this happens, you can still ping the map to try to ping or help your teammates understand where to go. Or if you see another teammate, try to buddy up with them. So whenever you're fighting a Drifter, try to just imagine that like you always fight with a buddy system. So 25-meter isolation range. That means that if you see a Drifter, just find your teammate and hold hands with him. But most of the time it's about simple things like buying bullet armor, or just like look at what items he buys. If he buys a lot of weapon damage, you buy bullet armor. If he buys a lot of spirit, then buy spirit armor. I feel like this is a pretty straightforward hero to counter because he's not insanely tanky. There's not anything specifically innate in his abilities that you can counter itemize, but it's mostly about the reason why this guy is so good in lower elo lobbies is because people run around alone and then he can like really start scaling upwards. Dinamo is one of the strongest supports in the game. He has an ultimate called Singularity. Now, Singularity is a giant black hole that pulls you in, and it's one of the very few abilities that you can't really buy any item to counter. Like you can always buy maybe like counter spell if you're lucky and parry it, and then somehow warp stone or dash out of it if you're on the edge. But it's very unlikely. And this is another one where it heavily depends on what kind of build the Dynamo plays. If he plays Stomp Dynamo, then Spirit Shielding or Spirit Resilience is great because it will deal a lot of burst damage but not a lot of sustain. If he plays Pure Support, then I think it's always worth to have some healing reduction on your team. When his 3 is maxed, it heals a shit ton. And he can run around while healing. So whenever there is a Dynamo in the lobby, consider getting Toxic Bullets or Healbane. I don't think you necessarily need Decay or Spirit Burn specifically for a Dynamo, but if there is a Dynamo and maybe another tank in the lobby, or maybe like a Kelvin or something, I highly recommend considering some anti-heals. Other than that, not really much specific to itemize against Dynamo, except it's about positioning. Because his black hole Singularity pulls all close by enemies into each other, it's about spacing. So it's the opposite of fighting against Drifter. If you check and you see that Dynamo has his ult up, you want to do the opposite. You want to spread out. You want to take engagements out in the open. He's a very big target, so he's very easy to shoot. But once he gets like in these corridors, he can very easily hit a stomp and land some big ults. So yeah, so mostly countering Dynamo is more about how you position yourself. Great Talon. Great Talon has one of the highest burst spirit damage in the game. So the most obvious item, at least for the mid to late game, is Spellbreaker, as you can almost completely negate one of his arrows as well as his ultimate. His ult is global. He can send a guided owl around the map and it does a lot of damage, and it has a built-in execute, and it gives him permanently 5 spirit power if he gets a kill with it. So Spellbreaker, Spirit Resilience, Spirit Shielding, highly recommended against a hero like Great Talon. I will say though, Great Talon is very squishy. Another item that is very strong against him because he is mostly flying up in the air is Knockdown. If you get a knockdown for Great Talon, you almost certainly guarantee that he has to stay super far in the back line and can't really push forward. Whenever you're fighting against a flyer, knockdown, just always good. Knockdown is great. It's a great item in itself. Like, you can never really go wrong with buying one because it also can disable items like Mo and Krill ult, Dinamo ult, and so on. But especially for Talon, because if you wait for him to use his rain of arrows, so he flies up in the air and he gets knocked down, then he's just a sitting duck. Very squishy, dies very easily, and most Great Talon players don't exactly buy a lot of greens. So yeah, buy knockdown and be prepared to take a lot of spirit damage. That's pretty much it.
They won't see me coming.
Then we have Haze. Haze is one of the few hyper carries in this game. Scales extremely well into the late game. Does tons of bullet damage. Haze has a passive called Fixation that basically means that you do more weapon damage the more you shoot the same targets. When a Haze gets really high fire rate, they just do tons of damage. So how do you stop this? Well, because Haze is very focused on fire rates, there's items that actually can do something about that. You have items like Suppressor. Suppressor reduces the target's fire rate. And you even have Juggernaut, which has the same effect as Suppressor, but it happens when someone shoots at you. So both these are great against Haze, not only because it lowers her fire rate, but if Haze builds items like toxic bullets and stuff, it also slows down how fast they can build up these debuffs because you're lowering the amount of fire rate they have. So definitely fire rate reduction is great against Haze. Another item is great against Haze is Return Fire, because once she pops her ult, she's just standing still on the ground and spinning around and doing a lot of damage. So if one or two players decide to just tank this ult and pop Return Fire, she will most definitely die. And last but not least, if a Haze gets super fed, you can consider getting Metal Skin. Just be wary that now that we have an item called Capacitor, you can actually remove Metal Skin by casting Capacitor. So it's like a mind game where you want to try to, basically, if you see that they're building Tesla bullets, they can always upgrade the Capacitor later. So have that in mind, that Metal Skin might not be the best idea, but sometimes just Bullet Resilience, or even something like a Warp Stone to get out of that close range can help you a lot against Haze. And even items like Knockdown, if they play like a ult build, you could go Knockdown and kind of force them to buy Unstoppable. That also works. Or even a Disarming Hex. There's plenty of options here, but the most of them are just targeted around thinking about ways to stop Haze from shooting fast or stop Haze from doing a lot of bullet damage. She does have a Sleep Dagger too, so some builds play more spirit based and have Sleep Dagger, and Sleep Dagger can be a counter with Reactive Barrier or even Spirit Shielding. Both of these should get activated pretty easily when you're fighting against the Haze. So that is also something to have in mind. Another thing in general about Haze is that she can go invisible, and she loves to stay in the side lane, and she loves to pick these 1v1 fights when she's ahead. So it's kind of like also when you're playing against a Drifter, be wary of where the Haze plays on the map, and if they are like 5 to 10k souls ahead of you, don't try to stay in the same area as the Haze plays in, because they can very easily run up to you and they will pop a slowing hex on you and ult, and it's just not going to be a good time. If they get really powerful, of course, get a curse. Get a curse. Stops their ult, stops everything. Curse is like when someone's being an asshole and you just want to stop them from being an asshole. Holliday. So Holliday finally got nerfed recently. I still think she's very strong, but nonetheless, this is a hero that has tons of aerial movement. In the laning stage, you'll take a lot of burst damage from the powder keg compared with the crack shot. But one of the big problems is also just catching a Holliday. So you definitely want to consider getting slowing hex or knockdowns, but bear in mind that she can still put down a bounce pad and jump on it. But having ways of slowing a Holliday is very smart because she can buy rapid recharge and do multiple bounce pads and just in general be really annoying. Another thing is that her Spirit Lasso is a stun. It's a long stun. So you can buy debuff reducer, and this is where you can use the search function too, to see which items actually lower the amount of debuff resistance or lower the time of the debuff. But there's one thing to have in mind, and that is that using a bounce pad extends the duration of Spirit Lasso. And that extended duration cannot get reduced from debuff resistance. But I still think it's very, very worth it to get some debuff resistance, because sometimes it throws off Holidays because they try to time their bounce pad at a specific time after they ult. So yeah, that's definitely very smart. And if they build heavily into Spirit or with the powder kegs, definitely consider buying Spirit Shielding or Spirit Resistance, or even Spellbreaker to completely negate the damage from one of the powder kegs. Holidays basically goes into the same category as Pocket and Calico as a pretty slippery hero. So whatever you can do to make them less slippery usually helps quite a lot. Another thing is also that Holliday usually wants to Spirit Lasso after she knocks you up with the powder keg. So if you have Counterspell, you can definitely try to time it so that when the powder keg hits you, you press F and therefore parry the Spirit Lasso that most likely will come right after. This requires some timing and practice, but definitely worth considering. Infernus. Infernus is another one of the hyper carry, hyper scaling heroes that basically just gets better and better the longer the game goes on for. He's very similar to Haze and Wraith in that regards, but there's one major difference. His main damage output is actually Spirit, because he has an Afterburn. Afterburn applies a burning effect on the target. They take a lot of Spirit damage over time, and once you've applied Afterburn on a target, you can keep reapplying the Afterburn with your other abilities. So he can definitely deal a ton of Spirit damage, which is why it's always worth to buy Debuff Remover in a game against Infernus. Being able to completely remove all the debuffs is great. A lot of Infernus players buy Toxic Bullets as well, and they lean very heavily into these debuffs. There are some exceptions though. If you play a dash build, for instance, where you barely shoot your gun, it's a very different way of playing against him. Dash Infernus is usually more tanky and more slippery, but has less damage overall. So make sure you identify early on, and one of the ways you can identify this is he buying Rapid Recharge pretty early, and maybe Radiant Regen too. These are two items that is very popular when you play a dash build, but not so popular if you play more gun build. So if you notice that he's buying Toxic Bullets, for instance, then you'll probably know he's going more towards Afterburn. And you can also just check what skill order he has on his abilities. That also helps. If he plays very heavily into Toxic Bullets and gun damage, definitely get a Debuff Remover. It's gonna help you so much. He doesn't have a lot of damage output if you're very debuff resistant to him. And if he plays dash, it's more about trying to avoid being on top of his flame dash, and also just buying things like Spirit Resilience and stuff, and anti-heal. Spirit Burn is great against him, but he's probably going to buy Debuff Remover. But still, this is like a skill issue too. If you try to bait out his Debuff Remover so that you can pop Spirit Burn on him, or even just a Heal Bane or a Toxic Bullets, absolutely great items. If he really tanks up, it could be worth to also get Crippling Headshot. This is obviously more a late game item, but definitely helps if he plays the dash build, because the dash build is more like similar to how a Victor would play. And I'm sure you guys have ran into Victor, and I'm sure you guys had a great time doing that. He can also not flame dash while slowing hexed, by the way. So definitely slowing hex is a good idea. And his ult is one of the easiest ults to parry with Counterspell. So one thing that is very common if you're mid-boss contesting, Infernus ult is super strong at contesting mid-boss. Counterspell, guys. It's funny because I'm saying this so much because I need to hear it too. I need to buy Counterspell a lot more, bro. Like, this item is so damn good. And it feels so damn good when you hit it too, by the way. Okay, next up we have Ivy. So Ivy is a hero that can be played in so many different ways that I highly recommend just analyzing what her build is. Does she go full Spirit with Kudzu Bomb and Lightning Scroll and Vortex Web, this whole like ult build? Is she playing Gun Ivy, where she like runs you down with her insane like fire rates and like debuffs and stuff? Or is she playing like a support where she uses rescue beam and like just plays more utilities? So I would say that like there isn't a specific thing to just counter every Ivy in general other than knockdown, because knockdown gets her out of her ult, and her ult has tons of value. You can use it to rotate around the map, you can use it to counter mid boss, you can use it to fly in a teammate. Like there's so many uses of that. So knockdown, always a great purchase. When I play against Ivy, I always buy Silence Wave, because when I play Bebop, for instance, and I hook Ivy, I Silence Wave so she can't dodge my abilities with Stone Form. Those are great things to consider, but other than that, just make sure you look at what builds she plays. Like if she plays full ult build with all the Vortex Web bullshit and Spirit, then definitely consider getting Spirit Armor, or maybe a debuff remover, because debuff remover can actually remove Vortex Web and the Lightning Scroll debuff as well. Also, bear in mind the Stone Form does stun you, so it will proc Reactive Barrier. So not that that's like a game changer, but that's something to have in mind in case that's something you want to help countering Ivy. And specifically for gun, it's essentially the same as playing against the Haze. You want to get return fire, you want to get bullet resilience, you want to slow down her fire rate with Juggernaut and with Suppressor. So yeah, not to sound like a broken record here, but obviously if gun shoots fast, make gun shoot slow, you know? It's gonna
This is dangerous work.
Kelvin.
Fortunately, I'm dangerously handsome.
So, Kelvin has a lot of built-in healing in his toolkit, and that is regardless of what build you play. He has healing on his Frost Grenade when it's 2 points. He has massive healing on his Frozen Shelter when it's massively upgraded. So, always against the Kelvin, it's always worth it to buy anti-heal. He also has a very big health pool built in, so Toxic Bullets and Heal Bane and Decay, Spirit Burn. These items are always super worth against the Kelvin. Other than that, this is another hero where you kind of have to see what build he plays. Does he go very heavily into Arctic Beam? Then definitely Spirit Armor is great. He also has a lot of movement slow in his kit, so getting Enduring Speed for some slow resistance can be pretty big. Maybe even upgrade it to Juggernaut later on to like struggle less with slowing abilities. When he catches you in his dome, it also like could be good to get an Ethereal Shift, because you basically just try to stall out the time before the dome runs out. Other than that, it's like pretty straightforward to play against the Kelvin, I'd say. Most of them play support or some kind of like Frost Grenade / Heal Beam / Arctic Beam. So most Kelvins definitely do mostly spirit damage. So the typical Spirit Resilience, Spirit Shielding, it's always a great purchase. And yeah, killing someone inside the Frozen Shelter is almost impossible unless you have some sort of anti-heal. So have that in the back of your mind. Lady Geist can be a menace later in the game. She has so much built-in healing. She has so much healing abilities in her life drain. You always buy a lot of Spirit Lifesteal or Leech on this hero or Infuser. And her Soul Exchange also counts as healing. So if she's healing debuffed, she's not going to heal as much from this as well. Buy anti-heal against Geist. Also, Geist loves to buy Spirit Armor because she deals spirit damage to herself with her abilities, with her bomb especially. It means that you know the Geist is going to have 50% Spirit Resist regardless. So items like Spirit Strike, Spirit Snatch, and Mystic Vuln, always super valuable against the Geist. Other than that, her ult has a very short range. If you see a Geist having her ult by pressing tab and looking at the top of the screen, there's going to be like that white eye that tells you that they have their ults. Stay away. Just stay away or get Silence Wave. So this is another hero where having Silence is great to avoid her ulting you. But it's mostly about like reading the situation and staying away if she has her ult and getting tons of healing debuffs. If you're struggling with killing her in general, you can definitely consider also Crippling Headshot. Crippling Headshot basically does everything that a Geist hates. It lowers her resistances and lowers her healing. So that's just a very, very good purchase overall. And I actually think that Crippling Headshot is one of the most underrated items in the current state of Deadlock. I think people sleep on this item. It's a 12-second debuff that applies every time you headshot. And it's pretty easy to hit at least one headshot within that time, I'm not gonna lie. So yeah, definitely buy this item more often, guys. You'll be surprised how much it does. I've started buying it on Paradox a lot now. You hit your full swap combo and then you keep applying this. And if you hit the carbine in the head, by the way, it applies crippling headshot before the entire combo. And then they will take 18% extra spirit damage from the entire combo if you hit the head. So yeah, definitely consider this item, guys. A lot of guys play like hybrid builds. So again, this is one of those you just got to see if she buys a lot of gun damage, like Berserker is very typical on her. But in general, you can never go wrong with a Spirit Resilience against the Geist. She's always going to proc Spirit Shielding or Spirit Resilience for sure. So that's kind of just a no-brainer. Next up, we have Lash. Lash is a guy who loves disrupting the enemy backlines. He loves to fly up in the air and pick you up and throw you down. He has very little sustained damage, but a lot of burst damage. So obviously, once again, you can never go wrong with Spirit Shielding against him. It's going to instantly proc as soon as he hits you with his Ground Strike. And Counterspell, guys. Counterspell. You will actually never get hit by a Lash ult if you buy a Counterspell. You just hear the ding, ding, ding. You press F, and you don't get picked up. Just Counterspell, Counterspell, Counterspell. Another one is E-Shift. You can do the same thing to dodge his ult. And in general, just like with Great Talon, Spellbreaker is a great item against Lash because in most cases, he's not going to proc your Spellbreaker with anything else before hitting you with a big slam because he usually is so high up that no other abilities are going to hit you from him before this one. Some really good Lash players, they will actually use their Flog first to proc it, but that also means they have to be a lot closer. In the laning stage, a lot of Lashes, they rush Quicksilver Reload to give their Flog more healing. So you don't necessarily have to itemize specifically around that, but just have in mind that he's going to try to spam, like every 12 seconds he can spam his Flog. It does a decent amount of damage and heals you even more because of the Quicksilver Reload. So just bear in mind that if you notice he does that, just don't engage with him every 12 seconds to give him that free Flog. That's going to make it a lot harder for you. Other than that, Lash is almost always spirit damage. So just think about that. Spirit Shielding, Spirit Resilience, and Knockdown. This is a great hero to buy Knockdown against. It makes it very hard for him to ult. And it forces him to buy Unstoppable. So yeah, it's a great item against Lash as well. Most Lash players honestly buy a ton of Spirit items. So just have that in the back of your mind. So don't be afraid to buy some juicy greens against him. But in general, Knockdown and also slowing Hex, whatever you can to keep him on the ground, and you usually win the fight against him. He's usually only strong when he can stay up in the air. So whatever you can do to not let him be up in the air and fight indoors. Fight indoors. Lash's ground slam is based on how far up he is when he does the slam. So if you can try to avoid fighting him outside, you're going to have a huge advantage. Okay. That was actually it for this video, guys. I think that it's easier if we do this in 2 episodes, and I think we did half the roster right now. So we're gonna do the other half as soon as I have time to record it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video very much, and don't forget to leave a comment down below if there was anything I missed or anything you felt like I could have done differently. Let me know. I'm always open to criticism. I'm trying to not make these guides too advanced because I just think there's a huge group of beginners right now that just wants more knowledge. So I'm trying to like make it like easy to take in. But yeah, I stream on Twitch every day, and I'm just starting my subathon now, so I'm gonna stream tons of Deadlock in the coming week. So feel free to pop by my stream and ask some questions, and I'm gonna try my best to have the other half of this guide out as soon as possible. Thank you for watching.